Thank you, Jared. We may have a few minutes for questions after the session. We'll see. Our next presenter is John Darwent, Jason Miszaniec, and Chris Darwent, across the river and around the bend, closing the gap between the Norton and Thule in Norton Sound, Alaska. John is up.
Am I there, Brian?
You are here. Take it away.
Okay. Before I start, I wish to acknowledge I'm actually at the University of California, Davis campus right now, and I wish to acknowledge that it is situated on the traditional lands of the Patwin peoples who have been here for thousands of years. And the second thing I want to note is that I have a fourth author that isn't in the abstract. Andrea Shirkman is also part of the investigators who have been integral to this project. Anyways, so today I'm going to talk about across the river and around the bend, closing the gap between Norton Sound and Thule in Norton Sound, Alaska. And what this project is essentially, there we go, start advancing. There we go. Okay, so this project is part of what we call the Shaktoolik Archaeology Project. It's a continuing project that we from University of California, Davis have been undertaking since 2013. And the goals of our project have been to understand the human ecological responses in the Shaktoolik area for the past 4,500 years. And part of what our mission when we've been doing our work is to actually ask our community members who live there about some of the questions that they are interested in about the past for the region, and so that we can kind of tailor our research towards their interests concerning what changed in their lands over time. Now, we started our work in 2013, and essentially at this point, we were starting to pick up where J.L. Giddings left off in 1962 and filling up the culture history of the area. Giddings worked out at Cape Denby at this time period and found the Denby Flint complex, and then kind of lost interest in the area and moved to the north up into Kotzebue Sound after that point to continue his research up there. And so he kind of created the chronology that we have there, and then it kind of sat in this location since that point. Just to mention where we have worked in the Shaktoolik Archaeology Project, our first work was at the Shaktoolik Airport site between 2013 and 2016. We undertook excavations there. We worked at Difjahawk, which is a Norton Age site between 2016 and 2017. And we worked in 2019 on the First Bend site, which I'll be talking about today, and did some site survey as the region as well. And so we have undertaken again this, we had a gap year in 2018, although we did visit the community that time, and we've always tried to engage our community members, and we've tried to have our local, we've hired local interns to come and assist us with our excavations. Now, as I mentioned, the Giddings kind of left the record off after he left in the area in 1962 from Cape Giddings, and from Cape Denby, I should say. And he particularly used the site of Ayadiat to sketch out a prehistoric, not a prehistoric, a cultural sequence for the area. I apologize. Essentially, he denoted what was called the Denby Flint complex, which we're all aware of, and then the Norton culture, and then he had the nucleate after that. And subsequent work in the area at the nucleate site by Murray et al. In 2003, at Ayadiat by Tremaine et al. In 2013, published 2018, some of the broader investigations in Norton Sound by Boxtos and Lutz, and our work at the Shaktoolik Airport site and Difjahawk, we've kind of started to fill in stuff, particularly in the later component. We've found that the occupation continues continuously throughout the last 900 years in the region. But what we've been left with, even after all this different work that's occurred in the area, that we have two significant gaps in the archaeological record. The first of these occurs between the Denby Flint complex and the Norton tradition, and it's about a 1,900-year gap. There might be particular reasons for that, but we're really interested in that one today because actually there's really at this point no way to look at that one yet. But what we'll be talking about today, or I'll be talking about today, is the gap between the Norton tradition and the nucleate tradition, which as of before 2019, we had again about a 900-year gap between the Norton culture, what we knew about the Norton culture, and then the nucleate culture. And we just did not know what filled in between these two areas. And I have a little blip right here, a blue blip right there. There's probably some OBS presence on the sound as well. But again, that's again in the early part of the first millennia AD. So anyhow, now archaeologists, as it goes, we do not like gaps often on the record, because a gap either means that there were no people living in the area, or alternatively, we haven't done enough work yet. And so what we were going off when we started this project is that quite possibly, since the area was really neglected since, Giddings, particularly the Shaktoolik area, since Giddings' work, we thought maybe that might be the aspect that was going on here. So our interest in filling in the gap between the Norton culture, oh, there we go, I circled it, between the Norton culture and the nucleate culture, kind of rooted out of our work at Difjahuk. And we worked there 2016, 2017, and based on our test excavations there, we had 2 periods of intensive Norton occupation in the region. One between about 450 BC, and the second one between 50 AD and 300 AD. And these periods are echoed for Norton Sound by Boxtos's and Lutz's work in the region, and also at Ayadiat as well. They have the same sort of periodization that's going there. And at all these sites, we have the same sort of gap as well. And evidence after about 350 AD wanes for the Norton tradition. So we have these 2 different occupations. We don't think it was abandoned between these 2, but we generally, most of our carbon dates do tend to fall within these 2 lines here, although we do have stuff that could have occurred in this area right here. So we were working in 2016 and we're thinking about how we could go about actually filling the gap in between the Norton and the nucleate in the region. And so essentially it came to us is that Difjahuk obviously sits on a fossil beach ridge, which is about 250 meters off of the coast of Norton Sound. And you can see right here, we have all these different beach ridges that are raised up in this location here, and Difjahuk sits on the 5th one. There's a sixth one there that possibly continues over there. But again, as how people have lived in this area is that you live on the beach ridge that's closest to the water. Obviously, at that time, we can assume that Difjahuk was pretty well close to the shoreline at that time. So it goes to task if the Norton were living on this ridge here, as we found at Cape Espenberg, as we found at Cape Krusenstern, beach ridges often have certain cultural occupations on them. And so what we did essentially is start looking up the beach ridge right here. And so here's Difjahuk right here. And if you start looking up the beach ridge right here, going down and going along, and now they do kind of compress together, but you end up on the other side, across the bend, so to speak, across the river, across the water, the Tugumanik River, and there the beach ridge continues. There are actually no Norton sites. The Difjahuk site ends right around here, although we did find some stuff that's in this area in 2019. But anyways, so logically, to investigate this, what we thought is that there should be stuff on the other side of the Tugumanik River there. And so there is. As I've circled right here, we actually have the first bend site. Now, in 2016, we started formulating this, and then in 2017, we actually went over and verified it, but we had a little bit of heads up. We did some space archaeology, so to speak, on our own, and looked at Google Earth, and you can actually see the house depressions on Google Earth, and these weren't recorded in the area, so we knew there had to probably be something there. We just did not know how old they were at that case. So we returned in 2017 when we were doing our second year of excavations at Difjahuk and looking at the site. And so we did a test there, and it produced about 639 artifacts, which were Norton of cultural affiliation. And we found one date of 1800 plus or minus 26 BP, which puts it in that second period of Norton occupation between 67 and 216 AD. And so with that date and the Norton cultural objects, it really did have a Norton cultural affiliation. And this tweaked our interest that this ridge possibly could have what we were looking for to fill in that gap. So previous research that's occurred on the Tegumenik River on the other side, on that beach ridge that I talked about. Here's Difchahuk here, the first bend site's located here, and you can see the beach ridge continues all the way along here up until the other side of the Tegumenik, across from the Shaktoolik village site today. And oops, wrong way. And again, there was a brief survey by Livingston and Gagnon as part of preparations for constructing a new airport, which they decided to actually put up over here on the end of the spit. One of the alternative areas was to possibly put it on this beach ridge right here. Fortunately for us, they didn't do it that way. So, but they essentially, Gagnon and Livingstone reported finding the 5 sites, but really just described them as house depressions and cache pits, and really didn't try to ascertain their age or do anything more. So we did know there was stuff there. We just had no idea about how old it was. Now, this is kind of just a recreation. There is some science behind it, but we need a lot more science behind it in the future. And that's one of the things we're going to hopefully convince somebody to come and help us in looking at the old coastline areas. It's ironic, if you want to know the coastline sea level elevations for the Bering Sea, people are all over it in the late Pleistocene, but when you come to the late Holocene, nobody really cares that much. So we haven't found much information yet in terms of how sea levels were around this time period here. But based on where the first bend site is and where the Difchahuk site is, we are pretty clear that the Tegumenik River probably actually came into the Norton Sound. And so the beach ridge itself that Difchahuk was present on was probably formed by about 500 BC and likely past the first bend site as well. And then we think, based on this, is that the Tegumenik River probably drained directly into Norton Sound. And we could have actually potentially had Tegumenik Bay, as I said right there, which would have been a secondary lagoon, which the people at Difchahuk were taking advantage when they lived there. Unfortunately, we do not know the extent of sea level at this time, but we do know from playing with the Arctic DEMs that are available for the area that 1 plus or minus 1 meter can make a significant impact on the low-lying topography, whether it's drowned or more exposed in the region. So by about 1 AD, it's likely that the beach ridge was expanding to the northwest and reached its current extent by about 500 AD. At some point after, the flow of the Tegumenik River, excuse me, I'm talking so fast, it was insufficient to enter Norton Sound past the transportation of the sediment, and the new beach ridge started to form after that place. And we know it is probably in where it is today by about 1000 AD based on the airport site, which was extant by about 900 or 1100 AD. So just to point out how 1.5 meters of tidal difference could make it in the area, this here is potentially Tegumenik Bay right here. This is taken from where our campsite was 30 minutes before we left it. And you can see when the sea level rise in this area, the whole area just floods. And so, and it was a couple of days of low pressure and rain. And unfortunately, the weather sufficed to raise the sea level and the high tides anyways, to make an end of a short story short, is that we had to leave quite rapidly, and this whole area actually went under another meter of water at this point. So, and this whole area then again could potentially have been a tidal flat. And what was surprising about it is 2 days later, we did return after all the water drained away, and we found all these little fish that all over these sites. And Jason, who's part of the project, he loves fish and those species, and he found out that he looked at them and he said, well, these are marine fish. And so the ocean actually tossed these fish onto our camp at the time. So anyways, Tegumenik Bay could have been a reality. We're something we're looking at into the future. But as the hypothesis, based on this logic that I've laid out in terms of what the topography was like, is that if traces of further Norton occupation of the Shaktoolik area are present between 350 AD and the arrival / development of the nuclide, they should be found on the Difchahuk beach ridge. And if it is increasing a ridge that is kind of building out to the northwest as it goes, the younger features should be found closer to the northwest terminus of the ridge as it expands. As people generally tend to try to live, as the modern day village is located, people try to live near the water, near these the bays, in order to take advantage of the game in those areas. So in 2018, we traveled to the community to discuss our earlier work and to seek guidance for future work. And members of the community we talked to at this point strongly supported returning to the first bend to investigate the site further and suggested further work also upriver in the interior, which we haven't got to yet. Thus, in 2019, we returned to undertake investigations to shed light on our settlement hypothesis in terms of how the people might have settled this area. And so what this involved is undertaking some test excavations at the first bend site, feature documentation on the old beach ridge, testing of beach ridge features, and drone mapping of the Shaktoolik Peninsula. And I'll just briefly talk about this, is that we did drone survey of the entire Shaktoolik Peninsula for about 14 kilometers, starting at Besson Slough, and going all the way up into the Shaktoolik Bay, right to the tip of the Shaktoolik sand spit. We used a DJI Mavic Pro drone, and this work was undertaken by Andreas Shirkman, who is now at the Max Planck Institute in Constance. And the reason we did this is we really needed an accurate topographic map of the Shaktoolik region. We did have the new Arctic DEMs, which shed immense light, but we wanted a better one than that, actually. And so we wanted to essentially be able to build our own topographic maps. And so he's actually, to this point, he took over 14,000 images at about 400 feet above sea level, and we spent many days and many battery changes running back and forth and putting base points down to assemble this map. And he is stitched together with AGSoft Metashape, and he's actually doing another rendition now. At present, we actually have our DEM down to about 10 centimeters of accuracy, and he wants to take it down even further, and he has the computing capacity to actually do that there in Constance. So anyways, our excavations at see, I'm starting to run out of time already. Excavations at the first bend site, it's older than we thought. It actually turns out that the date we found was relatively late from the first one. There's house depressions here that are coeval with Difjahuk. So it is later than we anticipated. And just to show some of the highlights from here, we found your classic tools that are associated with the Norton culture. We have end blades of chert and slate. We have obsidian points. We have slate lulus, slate adzes. I want to point out right here, we have a piece of grooved ochre, and this is kind of ties in with yesterday's discussion about ochre floors and a whole bit like that and the use of ochre. And this one here, you can see they actually have grooves, which looks like they were dragging a needle or some sort of pointy device in that back and forth. And so they're obviously getting that ochre to do some sort of dyeing work, either in fabric or possibly, you know, tattooing, that we just don't know at this point. The faunal preservation was poor, but it does seem that seal was dominant at the site itself. Unfortunately, bone preservation wasn't as good as we had anticipated, but there could be stuff still there. The pedestrian survey is what I need to get to finish off what I'm talking about. The beach ridge was walked multiple times, and all cultural features were recorded using an emelid reach, which is a kind of a low-cost Trimble. It gets stuff down to sub 10 centimeter levels of accuracy. And you see me here with the unit right here during my polar bear encounter. Luckily, he's missing a leg, so I was able to run away from him. But we've watched the beach ridge, and there's actually an immense amount of activity on it. We found 596 features altogether, 501 of which are cast depressions, but we also found 67 house depressions. That includes the first bend site, indeterminate depressions, and a few other site types as well. And what we found at this point is that the house depressions cluster into 8 groups that are kind of found throughout the different areas. You can see them right here. So there's about 8 clusters of house depressions. And so the first ones, which are found down here, you can see they're kind of a little shy. They don't show up quite as well as some of the other ones. And this is not a fault line. It's not California here. This isn't a split. This is an artifact of doing drone work that hopefully we can clean out during some more post processing. We also found a group of this right here, and these were actually identified briefly by Gagnon and Livingstone here, and you can see where these red dots are actually all house depressions right here. So they're these square-shaped house depressions, and we also have a village site on the end of the depression right here, and you can see right here, you can see these depressions as they are right here, the square depressions. As an example of these is 219,063, which is a house depression. Is typical of all the others that we found here. It has about a 12-meter width and 15-meter length, including the tunnels. So it's a little larger than the other ones here, but it really has the appearance of Norton-associated houses from back at Diffchahuk in the First Bend site. It has a square-shaped room, has a short entrance tunnel, and it has a substantial raised berm. And it is probably subterranean to a degree, but we can't tell because we didn't have enough time to do enough excavations to figure that out. They are not, though, as deep as the ones that found at Diffchahuk or First Bend. Those ones are about 1.5 meters to 2 meters deep, actually. There's one at First Bend. And in this particular site, this particular feature, we found a little tiny Norton style projectile point here and a piece of linear stamp pottery. Now, we put 10 50 by 50 centimeter units in at the end to assess the age and cultural affiliation of the house depressions. And most of these tests produced ASTT-like artifacts, including form tools such as these little small bifaces at the bottom. And some of the southeastern tests actually had Norton-ware pottery fragments. But as anticipated, this is the big thing that came back, is that our carbon dates came back and became increasingly younger. So what happened is our first, down here, we have a site, it came in at around the same age as the last occupation, the First Bend site. Then here at that kind of middle site that I showed, we have a date that came back at between 560 and 614 AD, which is already later than what we know about the Norton culture in the area. And then at the tip, we have one test pit up that we put in this location here. It came back of a date of AD 678 to AD 864. Which is considerably later. So it really does appear that the Norton tradition continued on based on the similarities of the houses, the similarities in the lithic forms. It really seems that the Norton continue to use this area right up until at least 750 BC to 800 BC. And the conclusions, I'm sorry, Brian, I see you face up your conclusions. So we do have a presence of Norton culture till 750 BP, 750 AD, 800. And so we have about 300 years of discontinuity that we still have to fill, but we're getting much closer. So we're in process of actually doing more dates from those 50 by 50s. And in 2022, we hope to come back and establish the cultural affiliations for those sites better, and also do some surveying up the river. We can return this year because of the COVID. We decided this year is not a good time to return. So 2022, though, it is. And so here's my acknowledgements. I'd like to thank the Shaktoolik Native Corporation and the Native Village of Shaktoolik, all the people who assisted us there, our funding committees, and then all our fantastic field crews. And I'm finished right there. Sorry for running over 3 minutes.